anything like me, you've jumped into WoW Reddit or Blizzard forum at least once since the Twisting Corridors came out, just to see what people have to say about it, and whether it's really that hard to do. In this video, I'll be giving you all the tools, tips, and tricks you can use to not have a hard time in Twisting Corridors, or at least not waste 3 hours on a failed run. My name is Ivona, and if you're here for the first time, pressing that sub button is kind of a good idea, because I do a bunch of simple WoW guides for Torghast, dungeons, raids, classes, specs, mounts, pets, and a whole lot more. So if you enjoy getting those sweet, easy wins in WoW, stick around. My first tip when it comes to Twisting Corridors is making peace with having to spend some resources on it. And by that, I mean your oil, flasks, pots, food, and gear enchantments. If you're a newer player, or someone who's not used to using these things, it's time to realize that Shadowlands is an expansion that kind of expects most players to use them. I won't go deeper into which consumables I recommend, because I did a separate video on dungeon and raid prep in Shadowlands, and I'll link that one to you in the description, so check it out. If you only have one flask or one oil and you don't want to spend more than that, I recommend using them after an hour or an hour and a half in the Twisting Corridors, depending on how long it actually takes you to complete it, as the higher floors get significantly harder after the second vendor floor, which is floor 12. Another thing you can use, specifically in the Torghast environment, which includes Twisting Corridors and not just the other wings, is the Phantasmic Infuser. You should be able to buy this upgrade from Venari if you've done a bit of mock questing, and it essentially gives you a 30-minute buff to your secondary stats at the cost of 100 Phantasma. More often than not, there are some Phantasma leftovers at the end of every run, and this is a good way to spend it. Apart from buffing one of your stats, it can increase the movement speed by 15% and give your spells and abilities 10% off their cooldowns, which is super handy, but you can only get one buff at a time, and the buffs don't persist when you exit Torghast wings, so be aware of that. However, it does persist through death, so you can die as much as you want. Just kidding, don't do that. I mean, in general, buying every Torghast upgrade available seems like a good idea if you have the Stygia, and cheating death is another good one. But if you haven't been enjoying this twisted version of Niflheim, I get it, because I haven't done that either. Here's another tip spotted by player Boring Uzumaki. Apparently, finishing the Twisting Corridors floor 6 3 separate times rather than going to the floor 18 once will help you complete the Lion quest. As tedious as this sounds, for players who just want to get their quest done and don't want to do the full corridors, this may be an easier route. I haven't tested this myself, so I can't fully stand behind it, but an overwhelming amount of positive feedback all across social media is making it feel trustworthy. Here's another hot topic when it comes to progressing through Twisting Corridors: the Cilice of Denathrius Anima power, which is currently available to all classes. It does feel a bit sketchy considering you may just die by the time you've gotten to the final boss, but if you're in the higher floors and you feel like you may need some extra DPS and healing push at the final boss, it may be worth it, but it all comes down to your better judgment. Another thing you want to consider is making a fine balance between your defensive and offensive anima powers, probably 2/3 of offensive ones and 1/3 of defensive powers. In the ordinary Torghast wings, it is generally recommended to always go for the high DPS choice if you have one, but in Twisting Corridors, both trash and bosses hit very hard, so you want to make sure you're not getting one-shot by them in the higher floors, and especially the floor 18 final boss, which has been reported to 1 or 2 shot players who picked the wrong anima powers. If you'd like me to do a guide on which anima powers to pick, let me know in the comments. My tip number 6 is checking your conduits. This is something a lot of players tend to ignore, but some of your conduit powers can be super useful for Torghast environment, and if you haven't been switching them around lately, you have the fully charged energy to do so now. Covering all conduit powers for all classes in this guide would prove to be an impossible task, but again, if you'd like to see a guide on those as well, let me know in the comment section and I'll see what I can do. Here's another little something you can do. If you don't like your starting anima power, you can actually reset it by exiting Twisting Corridors and entering again, but in order to do this, you have to finish floor 1 in at least one of the other Torghast wings. When it comes to whether or not you should party up to do Twisting Corridors, here's the deal. If your class feels undertuned and if you have someone who actually knows what they're doing, then by all means go for it. But if you're well geared and you'd like to do it together just for the sake of it, consider trying it alone first if you just want to get the quest done, especially if your friend is not ready for corridors gear-wise. Having a friend with you is always more fun, but if you're going together, do your best to be useful to one another, and one of you respecing into a healer or a tank is what I mean by that. Another thing to mention before jumping onto forums or writing your tickets is that your anima powers will stop displaying themselves themselves after you get 44 unique ones. This is solely on Blizzard's end, and your anima powers are definitely still being collected, but until this gets fixed or changed, if it even does, you'll have to rely on your own memory if you're trying to combine specific ones. My tip number 10 is more of a spec and class specific one, since I've gone through it as a destruction warlock. If you want to go really crazy, go for as many extra infernals as you possibly can, and take all the anima powers for buffing your demon's health and damage. You also want to take the anima power that makes your demon summons instant, as you can keep resummoning your little tank once he falls, and fall he will. If you want to skip some mob groups by the end of the run, you can use gateways on the staircase rounds to avoid some awkward combat spots where you'll likely get feared and fall off. Always have a health stone ready, always apply soul stone to yourself whenever you cool down, get more rain of fire radius increase and crit rock anima powers to do better against trash, use havoc like your bread and butter for breakfast, and take the best advantage of your gateways to get through the fire and beam traps. And that's pretty much it for this guide. If you learned at least one helpful thing that will help you progress through twisting corridors, leave this video a like. And while you're there, press that sub button because more Torghast guides are coming soon. If you have any questions and tips yourself, post them in the comments and I'll make sure to answer them. Thank you ever so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Have fun dwelling the corridors, and bye bye.